I still catch myself reaching for things that aren't there anymore. Not objects. Habits. Assumptions. The quiet confidence that used to sit in my chest when I thought about my life and who I was sharing it with. That part disappeared before I even realized it was under threat, like something taken while I was asleep. By the time I woke up, the space it left behind was already cold. There was a version of me who believed certain things were permanent. Not perfect, just solid. Mornings followed a rhythm. Conversations had weight. I had a place in someone else's life that felt earned and mutual. Now, when I replay those same routines in my head, they feel like scenes from a show I didn't know had been cancelled. Same set. Different meaning. I didn't lose the relationship all at once. I lost the role I thought I had in it. The strange part is that nothing dramatic announced the change. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just a quiet moment that seemed too small to matter at first. An inconvenience, really. One of those everyday hiccups you don't expect to carry consequences. I remember hesitating before doing anything at all. That's what sticks with me now. The pause. The internal debate over whether it was appropriate, whether I was crossing a line just by noticing something felt off. I told myself I was being paranoid. I reminded myself that trust means not looking for reasons to doubt. For a few seconds, I almost walked away. What stopped me wasn't suspicion. It was discomfort. A vague, crawling sense that something ordinary had shifted just enough to be wrong. Not wrong in a way you can explain, but wrong in the way your body recognizes before your brain catches up. The kind of feeling you dismiss because acknowledging it would require asking questions you're not ready to hear answers to. That was the moment safety quietly left the room. I didn't know then what I was about to learn. I only knew that something about the life I was standing in no longer lined up with the story I'd been telling myself. The ground hadn't collapsed. It had tilted. Just enough that I had to adjust my footing, whether I wanted to or not. As I kept going, that tilt became harder to ignore. Little details stacked on top of each other, not forming proof, just pressure. Each new piece didn't shock me on its own. What shocked me was how easily it all seemed to exist without me knowing. Like I had been present but not included. Close, but never inside the room where decisions were being made. What hurt wasn't the idea that someone could betray me. People do that every day. What hurt was realizing how long I'd been living inside a version of reality that wasn't shared. How much effort had gone into maintaining my ignorance. How casually I had been reduced to a character who existed for convenience, not truth. I didn't confront anyone right away. I didn't know how. Anger hadn't arrived yet. Neither had sadness. There was just this hollow clarity, the kind that strips things down to their most uncomfortable shape. I understood, in that moment, that whatever came next, I wouldn't get to return to who I was before noticing. Some lines only exist until you step over them. I'm telling this now not because I have answers, but because I didn't know how damaging the discovery itself could be. How it rearranges your memory. How it turns ordinary moments into evidence and forces you to grieve something that technically lasted longer than it deserved to. If stories like this resonate with you, if you've ever felt that quiet shift before everything made sense, consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing it. These stories don't offer closure, but they do remind us we're not alone in asking the hard questions. Before any of that happened, before I started looking back at everything with a different set of eyes, the relationship felt normal. Not in a boring way. In a comforting way. We weren't one of those couples who were constantly posting about how happy we were or making big declarations. We were quieter than that. We had routines. We had inside jokes. We had the kind of steady connection that makes you stop questioning whether you're okay, because you assume you are. I met her during a stretch of my life when I wasn't really looking for anything serious. I wasn't cynical, exactly, just tired. Tired of half-conversations and people who treated commitment like a temporary mood. She felt different. She was easy to talk to. Not overly intense, not distant either. Just present. When she asked how my day was, it didn't feel like a script. It felt like she actually wanted to know. And when I talked, she listened in a way that made me slow down and be honest. That mattered more than I realized at the time. The early months weren't dramatic. They weren't some whirlwind. They were simple in the best way. Cooking together. Long drives with no real destination. Sitting in the same room doing separate things and still feeling connected. I remember thinking, more than once, that this was what people meant when they said love was supposed to feel safe. We built something through repetition. Through showing up. Through small consistency. It wasn't fireworks every night, but it was warmth. It was steadiness. And I trusted her. That's the part that feels strange to say now, because trust sounds like something you either have or don't have. But it wasn't a switch. It was a gradual settling. The more time passed, the more I stopped bracing for disappointment. She knew things about me that I didn't share easily. The parts one usually kept folded up and hidden. My tendency to overthink. The way I avoided conflict. The fact that I liked feeling useful, sometimes too much. She didn't mock those things. She didn't exploit them, at least not openly. She just accepted them, like they were part of the package. And I did the same for her. She could be guarded in certain ways. Not cold, just private. There were moods she didn't explain. I didn't push. I told myself everyone has corners they keep to themselves. We weren't perfect, but it felt balanced. Over time, we started talking less like two individuals and more like a unit. We should do this. We could go there. Maybe one day. Nothing specific. Just the soft assumption of a shared future. That's what made it real. I think people underestimate how powerful that is. Not the big promises, but the casual ones. The way someone speaks as if you're already part of their long-term thinking. It makes you relax. It makes you stop imagining an exit. There were moments when I felt proud of us, in a quiet way. Like when we handled stress without turning on each other. Or when we disagreed and still found our way back to calm. I thought that meant maturity. I thought it meant we were solid. Looking back, I can see how much I depended on that feeling. Not because she demanded it, but because I wanted it. I wanted a life that didn't feel unstable. I wanted to believe I'd found something lasting. And she seemed to want the same. She would reach for my hand in public without thinking. She would text me little updates during the day. Nothing dramatic, just, heading home soon, or, did you eat yet? Those things sound small, but they build a kind of emotional architecture. They make you feel included. Considered. So when people ask, later, were there signs? I always want to laugh, but not because it's funny. Because the signs, at first, looked exactly like love. And that's what made it so easy to believe. I didn't feel like someone being fooled. I felt like someone finally living inside something mutual. I didn't know then that you can be standing in the center of someone's life and still not be fully inside it. At the time, I thought we were building the same story together. I didn't realize one of us might have been writing something else entirely. As time went on, the relationship didn't just become something I cared about. It became something I leaned on. Not in an unhealthy way, at least not by how I understood it then. It felt natural. When something good happened, she was the first person I wanted to tell. When something went wrong, knowing she was there softened the impact. Her presence turned into a kind of emotional constant, something I stopped questioning because it was always there. We started organizing our lives around each other without ever formally acknowledging that's what we were doing. Schedules shifted. Decisions were filtered through the quiet question of how they'd affect us. It didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like alignment. I trusted her with the unpolished parts of myself. The doubts I usually edited out. The moments where I wasn't confident or decisive. I didn't feel like I had to perform with her. That kind of openness is addictive in its own way. Once you experience it, you don't want to go back to guarded conversations. She seemed to value that closeness. Or at least, she encouraged it. When I hesitated, she'd reassure me. When I questioned myself, she'd tell me I was overthinking. Sometimes that felt grounding. Other times, it made me quieter. I didn't notice the difference right away. I just knew that being easygoing seemed to keep things smooth. I became good at that. There were moments where I deferred to her without consciously deciding to. Not because she demanded it, but because she usually sounded certain. She had a way of framing things that made her perspective feel more informed, more considered. I told myself that was respect. That was partnership. And maybe it was. At least on the surface. I stopped needing outside validation as much. Friends noticed it before I did. They'd joke that I'd settled down, that I was harder to pin down for spontaneous plans. I laughed it off. I felt like I'd graduated into something more stable. I didn't see it as shrinking. I saw it as focusing. Our private world grew stronger, more insulated. We had shared references that didn't need explaining. Reactions that happened without words. It felt like intimacy, and it was. But it also meant that when something felt slightly off, there was no obvious place to take that feeling. I didn't want to introduce friction where none seemed necessary. She knew my routines. My habits. The patterns of my days. She knew when I'd be distracted, when I'd be relaxed, when I'd be too tired to push back on anything. I didn't think of that as leverage. I thought of it as familiarity. Looking back, that's where the imbalance lived. Not in control, but in information. I was open by default. She was selective. I didn't notice because she never felt secretive, just private in a way I respected. I told myself that trust meant not needing access to every corner of someone's life. And I still believe that. What I didn't understand was that while I was offering myself fully, I was receiving something more curated. A version of her that fit cleanly into the life we were building. I don't think she planned it that way, not consciously. Or maybe she did, and I just wasn't equipped to see it. Either way, the result was the same. I became anchored to a relationship whose internal logic I didn't fully understand. The idea of losing her started to feel destabilizing. Not terrifying, just unthinkable. Like imagining gravity switching off. I didn't crave drama or reassurance. I craved continuity. That's how dependency sneaks in. Not through desperation, but through comfort. I trusted that what I was experiencing was shared. That the emotional weight I placed on us was evenly distributed. That we were holding the same thing from opposite sides. I didn't know then that you can feel deeply connected to someone who is standing on a very different map. At the time, I thought we were moving forward together. I didn't realize one of us might have known exactly where this was headed, while the other was simply along for the ride. The first moments of unease didn't arrive with any clarity. They showed up as background noise. A feeling I couldn't quite locate, like forgetting why you walked into a room but sensing it mattered. Nothing was obviously wrong. She didn't become cruel. She didn't disappear. If anything, most things stayed the same. That's what made the discomfort so easy to dismiss. When 90% of your life still feels stable, it's hard to justify focusing on the remaining 10. I told myself I was being sensitive. Sometimes it was her tone. Not colder, just thinner. Replies that landed flat where they used to carry warmth. Small delays that meant nothing on their own but started to cluster. I noticed myself rereading messages, searching for subtext I wouldn't have questioned before. I hated that version of myself. Other times it was her absence in moments where she used to be present. Mentally elsewhere. Half listening. Smiling at the right times without really engaging. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd say yes so easily that I felt foolish for asking. Just tired, she'd say. I accepted that. I wanted to accept that. There were practical inconsistencies too. Changes in routine that didn't come with explanation. Plans adjusted at the last minute. Stories that didn't quite line up, not enough to accuse, just enough to make me pause. Each time, I chose the most generous interpretation. I reminded myself that trust means not interrogating someone you love. The unease didn't push me toward action. It pushed me inward. I started checking myself before checking her. Asking whether I was projecting, whether stress was distorting my perception. I didn't want to become suspicious. I didn't want to be that person. So I became quieter. I stopped voicing every concern. I filed things away mentally, telling myself I'd revisit them if they became real problems. The trouble was, each thing on its own felt too small to deserve attention. Together, they were something else. There were moments when I caught glimpses of distance I couldn't bridge. A look that didn't linger. A laugh that didn't reach her eyes. The feeling that she was reacting rather than participating. It wasn't rejection. It was detachment. That hurt more, somehow. I remember one evening in particular, sitting across from her, talking about something that mattered to me. Halfway through, I realized she wasn't really listening. Not distracted, absent. When I stopped speaking, she nodded, like she'd been following along. I didn't correct her. I just adjusted my expectations. That's how it worked, gradually. I didn't confront the gap. I adapted around it. I told myself relationships shift. People go through phases. Love isn't always loud. And all of that is true. What I didn't account for was the emotional cost of constant self-editing. The way it trains you to doubt your instincts. The way it convinces you that peace is more important than clarity. I started feeling like I was on the outside of something I couldn't name. Like there was a room she stepped into that I wasn't invited to, and I didn't know whether that exclusion was intentional or simply convenient. I never found evidence. Not then. No proof. Just a steady accumulation of moments that left me unsettled in ways I couldn't articulate. That made it worse. Because without certainty, the mind fills in blanks in all the wrong ways. I alternated between suspicion and guilt, wondering which one was more unfair. To her, or to myself. I remember thinking, more than once, that I wished something concrete would happen. Not because I wanted to be right, but because I was tired of not knowing whether I was imagining the fracture. It felt like standing on a fault line that hadn't cracked yet, aware that the ground wasn't as solid as it used to be, but unable to say why. I didn't realize then how close I already was to crossing the line between doubt and knowing. I only knew that the sense of safety I'd once taken for granted was quietly eroding, and I didn't know how to stop it. The discovery didn't happen because I went looking for answers. That's important to me, even now. It happened because something else failed. I needed access to something mundane. A backup. A workaround. One of those minor inconveniences you expect to solve in 5 minutes and forget about by the end of the day. There was an older device around, untouched for a long time. I hesitated before using it, mostly out of habit. It felt intrusive, even though it wasn't really off-limits. I told myself I'd be quick. I told myself I wouldn't look at anything personal. When it powered on, it didn't feel like opening a secret. It felt like opening a time capsule no one had bothered to seal. The screen came alive slowly, restoring things exactly as they'd been left. Old windows. Old tabs. Nothing alarming at first. I remember thinking, this is fine. Then I saw something that made my stomach tighten. Not a message, not a photo. Just a name. My name. Sitting somewhere I wasn't expecting it to be. I stared at it longer than I needed to. That was the moment where I still had a choice. I could have closed everything. Walked away. Told myself it was none of my business. That privacy mattered more than curiosity. I actually reached for the power button. What stopped me wasn't suspicion. It was confusion. Why would my name be there? I told myself I'd just glance. Just enough to understand what I was looking at. Just enough to quiet the discomfort so I could move on. That's how it started. What followed wasn't a single revelation. It was a slow, methodical unraveling. One thread leading to another. Messages that referenced things I didn't recognize. Plans that didn't include me. A version of her voice I'd never heard before, lighter, sharper, amused in ways that didn't belong to us. The dates blurred together as I scrolled. What I felt wasn't rage. It was disbelief, stretched thin. I kept waiting for the part where it would stop making sense. Where context would appear and reassure me I was misreading everything. It never did. The further back I went, the worse it got. Not because it became more explicit, but because it became more intentional. Arrangements. Coordination. Casual references to time and place, handled with ease. Like this was just another responsibility she managed. And then there were the mentions of me. Not cruel. That would have been easier. They were light. Familiar. Dismissive in a way that suggested comfort. Like I was a known quantity. Predictable. Harmless. I wasn't a partner in those conversations. I was an accessory. A background character whose traits could be summarized and joked about without consequence. That's when it hit me. It wasn't the physical betrayal that hollowed me out. It was the planning. The effort it took to maintain two versions of reality. The way my trust had been accounted for, anticipated, managed. I'd been considered. Just not respected. I sat there for a long time without moving. The room felt unreal, like it belonged to someone else. I remember noticing small details, the hum of the device, the dimness of the screen, the way my hands felt heavy and unfamiliar. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I felt strangely clear, like something inside me had gone quiet. By the time I heard her come home, I had already crossed into a different version of myself. Someone who knew something they couldn't unknow. Someone who understood that whatever conversation was coming next, the relationship I thought I had was already gone. When she saw me sitting there, she froze. Not dramatically. Just enough. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I asked one question. A simple one. The only one that mattered to me in that moment. How long was this supposed to go on? She didn't answer right away. And in that pause, I realized something else that would stay with me long after everything else fell apart. The betrayal had hurt. But the discovery, seeing how thoroughly my reality had been curated without my consent, that was the part that broke something I didn't yet know how to name. She didn't sit down at first. She stood near the doorway like she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to enter the room. Her eyes kept flicking between me and the screen, as if looking at it too long would make it more real. I stayed where I was. The silence stretched in a way that felt almost physical. Not dramatic silence. Just the absence of anything honest. I thought she might deny it. I thought she might get angry. I thought she might do something to make it easier for me to place her in a familiar role. She didn't. Her face wasn't defensive. It was guarded. Like someone calculating what version of themselves they needed to become next. I asked again, quieter this time, because volume suddenly felt irrelevant. How long? That was all I could manage. Not why, not who, not even how could you. Just that one question, because it held everything underneath it. How long had I been living in something false? She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. I didn't want to hurt you, she said. It was such a familiar sentence. People say it like it means something. I remember nodding, not because I agreed, but because my brain was still catching up to the idea that we were having this conversation at all. You didn't want to hurt me, I repeated. So you just let me keep going? Her eyes dropped. I didn't know how to stop. That was the first time I felt anger, not hot, not explosive. More like something rising slowly from the bottom of a deep place. Because stopping had never been complicated for me. Stopping would have been the simplest form of mercy. What she meant was she didn't know how to stop without consequences. And I was realizing, in real time, that I had been the easiest consequence to manage. I stood up then, mostly because sitting felt too passive. My legs were unsteady, but my voice stayed flat. Did you ever think about telling me? She hesitated. That hesitation answered more than any confession could have. There were fragments after that. Not a full explanation. Not some clean narrative. Just pieces. Half-truths wrapped in vague language. The kind of speech people use when they're trying to minimize the shape of what they've done. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. It just happened. Each one landed wrong. Because it hadn't just happened. Not with planning. Not with effort. Not with time. I realized she was trying to talk me back into the version of reality where I could stay. Where this could be processed, forgiven, absorbed. But something in me had shifted too far. I wasn't interested in details. I didn't ask for names or timelines. I didn't want images in my head I couldn't remove. I wanted to understand something simpler and somehow harder. How do you look at someone every day while holding that kind of secret? She started crying eventually. Quietly. Not performative. Just the sound of someone watching their own life collapse. And I felt distant. That was the strangest part. I thought I would feel satisfaction seeing remorse. I didn't. It didn't repair anything. It didn't rewind time. It didn't give me back the person I'd been before I opened that screen. I walked into another room and closed the door, not to punish her, but because I needed space to breathe without sharing air with the lie. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and realized that betrayal isn't only an act. It's an atmosphere. It changes the past as much as it changes the future. In the days that followed, the collapse wasn't loud. It was administrative. Conversations about logistics. Awkward silences. The strange feeling of moving through a home that no longer felt mutual. Friends noticed something was wrong, but I couldn't explain it. Not yet. Saying it out loud made it too solid. And underneath everything was the same unanswered question, echoing louder the more time passed. How long had I been the only one living in the relationship I believed we had? It took time for the shock to wear off. Not days. Not weeks. More like a slow settling, where the noise in my head finally dropped low enough for patterns to emerge. Once it did, things I'd brushed aside started lining up in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. Moments I'd labeled as nothing took on new weight. The missed conversations. The emotional absences. The way I'd learned to phrase things carefully, to keep the peace. I hadn't imagined the distance. I'd just been the only one trying to bridge it. That realization didn't make me feel better right away. If anything, it hurt more. Because it meant my instincts had been right long before I had proof. I'd felt the shift and chosen to doubt myself instead. I replayed old interactions in my head, not obsessively, but with a new lens. I saw where I'd been accommodating in ways that weren't mutual. where I'd accepted explanations that were technically plausible but emotionally hollow. What surprised me most was how calm I felt once that clicked. There was grief, sure. Anger too. But underneath it all was validation. Not the satisfying kind. The quiet, unsettling kind. The kind that says, you weren't wrong, you were just kept in the dark. I stopped asking myself what I could have done differently. That question lost its power once I understood the imbalance. You can't fix a problem you're not allowed to see. I also stopped trying to make sense of her choices. That urge faded when I realized her reasoning didn't change the outcome. The damage wasn't caused by one decision. It was caused by a sustained willingness to let me live inside a false version of my own life. That's what reframed everything for me. Betrayal isn't just about crossing a line. It's about denying someone informed consent to their own reality. Once I understood that, the shame I'd been carrying eased. It wasn't my job to detect deception. It was her responsibility not to construct it. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt that slow erosion of trust before the truth came into focus, take a moment to subscribe, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. These conversations matter more than we admit, and you never know who might need to hear they're not imagining things. I didn't feel healed yet. But for the first time since everything came apart, I felt grounded. And that felt like the beginning of something I could stand on again. I don't tell this story because I think I handled everything perfectly. I didn't. I avoided things I should have questioned sooner. I trusted longer than was wise. I confused calm with honesty and consistency with truth. But I also know now that none of that justifies what happened. Time has given me distance, not closure. I still think about the difference between betrayal as an act and betrayal as a condition. One is a moment. The other is a choice repeated quietly, over and over, while someone else builds their life on assumptions that aren't real. What stays with me isn't the details. It's the realization that trust isn't just about fidelity. It's about allowing someone full agency over their own life. About giving them the information they need to decide what they're consenting to. I wasn't given that. And I wonder sometimes how many people are walking around inside relationships that feel mostly fine, slowly adjusting themselves to discomfort they can't name, telling themselves it's normal. I did that. I don't know if there's a clean answer for where responsibility begins or ends in situations like this. I only know that love without honesty isn't protection, it's control dressed up as kindness. So I'll leave you with the question I still sit with. Is betrayal defined by the moment someone crosses a line? Or by how long they let you live inside a version of your life that isn't true? If this story made you pause, consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Conversations like these don't offer easy answers, but they do remind us that our instincts deserve respect.